The church doors opened with a slow, heavy groan. At first, the guests thought it was time. The organ kept playing, soft and steady, carrying through the air like it had all morning. Heads turned toward the entrance, smiles forming. But the figure standing there wasn't the bride they remembered. The gown was red, deep, unshifting red, the kind that caught the light and refused to let it go. No lace, no veil, no trace of the dress she'd chosen months ago. She stepped inside without a word. The sound of her shoes against the tile was sharp, each one spaced apart as if she'd measured the distance between them. In her hand, a small piece of torn fabric dangled loosely, once white, now marked with smudges that didn't belong to her. The groom's smile collapsed in an instant, his hands curled together, knuckles white. The maid of honor turned her gaze to the floor, bouquet trembling in her hands. Murmurs began in the back rows, moving forward in ripples. A few guests exchanged quick glances, but no one spoke loudly enough to be heard. The air shifted, heavier now, as if everyone had silently agreed to hold their breath. She didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed on him. Step after step, she moved down the aisle, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of her approach. She stopped just short of the altar, close enough for him to see the faint streak of color on her knuckles, a shade he knew well. Her lips curved upward, but it wasn't the smile from the rehearsal dinner or the one captured in the engagement photos. This one was different, measured, almost delicate. She raised the torn veil slightly, just enough for the light from the stained glass to catch it. Someone in the front row whispered two words. Words that didn't need to be louder than that. She knows. And from that moment forward, every person in that church understood. Whatever they thought this day would be, it wasn't anymore. Before the red dress, before the torn veil, she was Emily Rowe. She'd grown up in this town, the kind of place where people still waved to each other in traffic and where everyone knew who taught the art classes at the elementary school. That was Emily, 28 years old, the kind of person who remembered your birthday without needing to check a calendar. She met Daniel Carter at a charity auction on a late autumn evening. He was new to town, out of place in a way that made people notice him. He carried himself like someone who had lived in places where the street stayed awake long after midnight. They spoke that night, and for reasons neither could explain, it felt as if they'd known each other much longer. Within months, they were together. And then there was Claire, Emily's maid of honor, her friend for as long as she could remember. They'd shared bus rides to school, secrets in the back of the library, long summer evenings lying on the grass talking about the future. Claire was family in every way that mattered. The three of them formed an easy rhythm. Daniel fit into their lives without effort. He and Claire laughed easily together, and Emily took comfort in that. She liked to believe it meant there would be no hidden lines to cross, no boundaries to guard. The wedding had been planned for over a year. Every detail was carefully chosen: lace-wrapped jars for centerpieces, a string quartet for the ceremony, the same church where Emily's parents had stood decades earlier. She loved the idea of following in their footsteps. On the morning of the wedding, the sky was clear, the air warm. Inside the bridal suite, the room was filled with the scent of flowers and the low hum of conversation. Emily sat near the window as her hair was pinned in place, watching the light change across the floor. Claire moved in and out of the room, speaking to the photographer, adjusting the flower girl's crown, checking on Daniel. Each time she returned, she said the same thing. "He's fine, just a little nervous." Emily believed her. The photographer arrived just before noon. He moved through the bridal suite with careful steps, lifting his camera only when he was certain the moment was worth preserving. Emily posed where she was told, bouquet cradled just under her chin, eyes toward the window. There was laughter when the bridesmaids gathered around her, the kind that fills a room and makes you forget, for a second, how much the day matters. But each time the camera clicked, Emily could feel a faint tremor in her hands. She pressed her fingers tighter around the bouquet so no one would see. She told herself it was excitement, that this is what every bride feels just before the aisle. Outside the suite, footsteps passed in hurried patterns, the shuffle of guests arriving, the creak of the old wooden pews. Somewhere beyond the door, the organist tested the keys, a low, steady hum running beneath the chatter. Claire returned again, hair perfectly arranged, lipstick untouched. She smiled as if nothing in the world could go wrong. 5 more minutes, she said, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. Then it's time. Emily nodded, her throat dry. A bridesmaid handed her a glass of water. She drank half in one swallow, the other half slow, letting the cold sink in. With just minutes to go, Emily stepped out of the bridal suite. The hallway beyond was cooler, quieter. She needed the air. The scent of flowers in that small room had grown too sweet, too heavy. She walked toward the far end of the corridor, where the stained glass windows threw muted colors across the floor. The sound of the organ was softer here, distant enough to feel separate from the moment. That's when she heard it. A laugh, not loud but close, muffled, as if someone were trying not to be heard. She turned her head toward the old side hall. Another sound followed, a quick, sudden inhale, the kind that comes when 2 people realize they're not alone. Emily's steps were slow as she moved toward the narrow wooden door at the end. It was half closed, light spilling from the gap at its base. She stopped, her hand resting on the worn brass handle. The air inside carried a faint trace of perfume she didn't recognize. She pushed the door open. The first thing she saw was her veil, crumpled in the sink, the edges stained in a way no fabric should be on this day. The second was Daniel, his expression locked somewhere between shock and a plea for explanation. Claire was beside him, hair slightly out of place, lipstick smudged just enough to tell the truth without words. Her bouquet lay on the tiled floor. No one spoke. Emily's eyes moved from the veil to Daniel, to Claire, then back again. She stepped backward, letting the door ease shut between them without the click of the latch. And then she turned away, walking down the corridor as the sound of the organ swelled, carrying the weight of a ceremony that would never be what it was meant to be. Emily kept walking. Past the bridal suite, past the murmuring clusters of guests in the foyer, past the heavy front doors of the church. No one stopped her. No one asked why the bride was leaving with 10 minutes until the ceremony. Outside, the sunlight hit her face in sharp contrast to the dimness she'd just left. The air was warm, almost too warm, but it didn't touch her. Her hands stayed cold. She crossed the parking lot without looking back. The car door opened easily, the keys still where she'd left them earlier that morning. She sat for a moment, her fingers resting on the steering wheel, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Then she pulled out, the church shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind a line of trees. The drive to her apartment took 7 minutes. She parked without care for the angle, leaving the door unlocked as she climbed the stairs. Inside, the air was still. She walked directly to the bedroom. In the far corner of her wardrobe, beneath a row of neatly hung dresses, was a garment bag she hadn't opened in years. The zipper's teeth made a slow rasp as it came down. The fabric inside was deep, unyielding red. She pulled it free and laid it across the bed. No lace, no satin shimmer. Just a steady, rich tone that demanded attention without asking for permission. She stepped out of the white gown, letting it fall into a heap on the floor. There was no pause, no hesitation. The red dress slid over her shoulders like it had been waiting for this moment. In the mirror, she studied herself. The woman staring back wasn't the one from the morning, the one with the soft veil and careful smile. Her hair was still perfect, her makeup untouched, but there was something in her eyes now that didn't belong to photographs or rehearsed expressions. She took one last look at the white gown on the floor, then stepped into her shoes and walked out the door. The return drive to the church felt shorter. She pulled into the lot, stopping in the same space she'd left earlier. This time, she could hear the faint hum of the organ before she even reached the entrance. Inside, the ceremony had been delayed. Guests whispered, checking their watches, wondering where she had gone. Then the doors opened. The hinges gave way with a long, low creak. Every head turned. The organist didn't stop playing, but the melody faltered for a single beat. The kind of hesitation only musicians notice, the kind that happens when the unexpected forces its way into the room. Emily stepped inside, red, from shoulder to hem. The fabric caught the glow from the stained glass above the doors, throwing faint reflections onto the walls as she began her walk. Her pace was measured, each step deliberate, the heel of her shoe striking the tile with the same steady rhythm as before. The torn veil was still in her hand. It hung there loosely, its frayed edge brushing against her dress with each movement. Daniel's mouth parted slightly, but no sound followed. He stood at the altar, his posture stiff, his gaze fixed on her as if he couldn't decide whether to step forward or back. Claire shifted in place beside him, her bouquet trembling just enough for the petals to shake. Her eyes stayed down, fixed on the floorboards beneath her feet. Murmurs rippled through the pews. Some guests leaned forward to see better. Others sat back as if putting distance between themselves and whatever was about to happen. Emily reached the midpoint of the aisle and didn't break her gaze. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at the minister waiting in uncertain stillness. Every ounce of her focus stayed locked on the man she was meant to marry. When she reached the front, she stopped just far enough away to make him notice the space between them. She didn't offer her hand. She didn't move closer. Instead, she turned slightly, enough to face the guests. Her voice was calm when she began speaking, calm enough that people had to lean forward to hear her. She told them about the veil in the sink, the lipstick on the edge, the sound she'd followed down the hall. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She spoke as if reciting facts, each one laid out in order. When she was finished, she looked back to Daniel. "You can leave now," she said. "Both of you." No one moved at first. Then someone in the second row shifted, the sound of a chair leg scraping against the floor cutting through the silence. Daniel glanced toward Claire. Claire glanced toward the doors. A few guests stood and walked out without looking back. Others clapped, sharp and brief, the kind of applause that isn't about celebration but about agreeing with a choice. Daniel and Claire turned together, the aisle suddenly longer for them than it had been for her. They walked toward the doors under the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. The doors closed behind them with a soft thud. For a moment, no one in the church moved. The organist's hands hovered above the keys, unsure whether to play again or let the silence speak for itself. Emily remained at the front, the red dress unmoving, the torn veil still in her hand. She looked out at the guests, at the faces that held a mixture of shock, discomfort, and something else. Relief. A voice from the back broke the stillness. "Well," it said, "I suppose we should celebrate." Laughter followed, hesitant at first, then stronger. Someone began clapping again, and this time others joined in, the sound filling the room. Emily stepped down from the altar and moved toward the reception hall without looking over her shoulder. The guests followed, some whispering to one another, others walking in quiet, still processing what they had witnessed. In the reception room, the music was turned up. The tables set for a wedding feast stood untouched for only a few moments before people began sitting, pouring wine and taking plates. The white gown she had left behind in her apartment was replaced in every photo that day by the red. Cameras caught her laughing with friends, her arm around her aunt, lifting a glass in quiet acknowledgement of those who had stayed. By the following morning, one of those photos had made its way online. A single frame, Emily standing in the center of the church aisle in her crimson dress, the light from the stained glass crowning her in color. The caption was simple, "The Red Bride." Within days, the image spread beyond the town. Articles were written. Threads appeared on forums filled with strangers debating whether she was brave, cold, or something else entirely. Daniel and Claire left town within weeks. No forwarding addresses, no public explanations. Their names faded from conversation, except when the story was told again, months later, to someone who hadn't heard it yet. Emily stayed. She went back to teaching, to her yellow-walled apartment, to mornings with coffee on the balcony. But there was something new now. An inbox filled with messages from strangers. People who had been betrayed, people who had left, people who had stayed. Some just wanted to tell her their own stories. Others asked for advice she didn't claim to have. Eventually, she began recording their words. At first for herself, then for anyone who wanted to listen. The first episode of her podcast opened with a single sentence. Sometimes the aisle you walk down isn't the one you expected, but it's still yours. 3 years have passed. The podcast now reaches millions. It's recorded in a small upstairs room of her apartment, the walls lined with mismatched shelves of books and a single microphone in the center. Listeners never see her face, only hear her voice. The red dress never appears again in public, but it hangs in her closet, pressed and untouched, wrapped in the same garment bag she once unzipped in silence. She rarely talks about her own wedding day on the show. When she does, it's not about betrayal or revenge. It's about choice, about the power in walking into a room, knowing you control how you will leave it. The guests who were there still remember the sound of her heels on the aisle, the red fabric cutting through the muted colors of the church. Some say they still picture Daniel's face in that first second he saw her, a moment they describe with no need for embellishment. On quiet evenings, Emily can be found at the same balcony table, coffee replaced with tea, laptop open, headphones around her neck. Sometimes she scrolls through emails from strangers who sign their letters simply, "From someone who understands." And every so often, when the sun is low and the sky turns the same shade as the dress, she will stand, walk to the closet, and touch the fabric lightly. Not as a reminder of the man she didn't marry, but of the aisle she claimed for herself. The wedding never happened. The story never stopped.